Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the March Advanced U program for the Association of Fraternity Sorority Advisors. Due to the generous support of Zeta Tau Alpha, Advanced U is designed to enhance the alignment of the fraternity sorority experience with the changing dynamics of higher education. The goal is to provide programs each month that range from new skill development to application of new concepts through exploring a wide variety of topics in higher education and work with fraternities and sororities. Today's program is Supervisor 101, How to Be a Great Boss. Everyone aspires to become a supervisor, but do we all have the skills to do that well? Graduate programs and entry-level jobs don't train us for the tough job of supporting and advocating for those we supervise. So most times we're left scrambling. How can we better lead our team to accomplish professional and personal goals through their work? This Advanced U session will share some of those fundamentals for being an effective boss, one that people actually want to work for. My name is Becky Gleason, and I serve as the Director of Education and Curriculum Design at Zeta Tau Alpha. I have the privilege of serving as the moderator for today's program. So before we begin, I would like to go over just a few logistics of today's program. If you are hearing me now, then congratulations. You already know how to connect to the audio with GoToWebinar. Just note that the registration confirmation email you received included audio options for both computer speakers and telephone. So if you experience any system issues, we encourage you to do the second option. In the main area of your computer screen, you should see today's presentation slides. And then at the upper right corner, you should have the control panel. In this panel, you can submit questions to us at any point throughout today's program. While some might be addressed throughout, we will leave time at the end reserved specifically for Q&A. Feel free to use that to report any technical issues you experience so that our team can address them accordingly. More specific technical issues can be handled with GoToWebinar Support Center at 866-926-6492. Also note that we will be tracking the Advanced U hashtag on Twitter, so we encourage you to share and participate about what you're learning through the program through this tool. We will now begin today's program. We're so happy to have Jessica Gendron-Williams, the CEO of Fired Up Productions and Innova, doing this webinar today. Jessica will cover her background during the presentation, so without further ado, I want to turn things over to her.
Thanks, Becky. I'm Jessica Gendron-Williams. I am the CEO of Fired Up, Technify, and Innova. I'm sure some of you on the phone that are listening know who I am. I've been in the industry for a little while now and have learned a lot of lessons, I think, from supervising staff and from being supervised in graduate school as a traveling consultant and in the profession. And I think that one of the things that I noticed from the graduate programs that I had is that there wasn't a lot of training or education that we got around how to be a good supervisor, but it seems to be the #1 thing that we look for in a professional development opportunity. When we go to a campus, we really want to be able to supervise people, and that is the next step in sort of moving up the chain. What experienced, good and bad, by being supervised by other people, whether as a graduate student, in our first big kid job at a school, or even on a campus where you are now. And I think that some of those things are good and some of those things are bad. And so I started to do a bunch of reading when I became CEO of Fired Up about 4 years ago, because I really didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. And I really didn't feel like I had a good handle on what it actually meant to be a great supervisor. And so I started reading a bunch of books. I started reading a bunch of articles in the Harvard Business Review and Inc. magazine and Fast Company and Forbes, and looking for all of these things to be a great boss. And I've sort of created this philosophy around how to be a great supervisor and how to be a great boss. And they sort of revolve around 3 core components. And those 3 core components are core values, common goal, and relationships. And I want to dig into each 3 of these with you, but I think what's important is that we look at them not as 3 separate circles, but we look at them sort of as an intersection. And ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to get all of the people that we are supervising, all of the employees that we're working with, to a level of excellence in their job. I don't think any supervisor on the planet sits around and hopes that their employees suck at what they do. I think that we all desperately want the people that we hire and the people who work for us to be good and to be high performers and to be achievers and to get the job done and do it with excellence. And so I want to talk about what happens when the intersection of these three things occur and we get excellence from our employees. But it takes some intentionality and it takes some practice. I will be the first to say that I am not the best supervisor on the planet. I've learned a lot of lessons in the time that I've been a professional in the industry about what to do and what not to do and how to take care of your people and what are really bad things to do to your people, and what makes people leave and what makes people stay. And so I will just add a little disclaimer to the front of this that I have a lot of information that I want to share with you. I have my own personal philosophy that I think is pretty good, but I by no means have it all figured out. And I'm happy to share with you all, and I will share with you all some of the mistakes and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, hoping that you maybe don't make the same ones as I did, because sometimes they can be pretty painful. And so I'll just say that up front as we sort of dig in. And I want to start with core values because I think that that's the easiest one to start with. And when we think about core values, we think about as an office, as a work group, as a division, whatever is sort of the umbrella of group that you oversee, do you have some common language? Do you have some core guiding principles that everyone on your team mutually understands and can be mutually held accountable to? Now, you may have some values for the Division of Student Affairs that have already been developed. You may have some values that you've developed as your Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life or your Student Life and Learning Office or whatever the office is called, because Lord knows there's 100 names for them. But you may already have those values for how you communicate and hold each other accountable and that you're mutually accountable to as a team. If you don't know what those are, or if you don't feel like you have those, I think that there's an opportunity for you as your team that you're working with to sort of create some common value language for your team. When I became CEO, we didn't have any common value language as a company. We had what we called values that were posted on our website, and there was like 15 of them. And they were basically the values that were ingrained in the stuff that we were teaching. But they weren't necessarily our core operational or our core how we do our business values. And so I realized that one of the they have some common value language that we use as a way to hold each other accountable, that we use as that common thread to weave through everything that we do. We didn't have that. And so we went through a process to sort of create that. What are our core values? How can we use common language in terms of values and use those to hold each other accountable? So the first thing that we did is we gave every single staff member a couple of reflection questions where we asked them to think about the highest performers on our team and what they believe the values that they possess are that makes them successful in their job. We asked them to reflect on our owners, Josh and Matt, and what values it took for them to create and make a successful company from the very beginning. And we asked them to think about what it takes to be successful in our industry and what it takes for us to be successful as a company and what values we need to enact. I also sent similar reflection questions to our owners, Josh and Matt, where I asked them to look at our most successful employees over time. What are the values that you believe has made them successful? The people who maybe didn't thrive in our company environment, what do you believe was missing from their value set that maybe hindered their success? And so we asked everyone in the company to reflect on those things, and then we sort of came together in a conversation where I, as sort of the scribe or the secretary of the conversation, just listened to what everybody said and what everybody thought about those reflection questions and took lots and lots and lots of notes. And from those notes, I did some scoring of all the data where I was able to arrive on 5 values, 5 words that I felt like we could clump everything that everyone said into one of those 5 categories. And where we ended up were these 5 values: relationships, grit, innovation, fun, and excellence. I picked grit as the example because it's one that people don't see very often, and it's one of the ones that I love the most, and so we'll dig into that. But essentially what we did is we created our common values language. I think if you have already existing Division of Student Affairs values and you want to use those, that's great. But what we have to do is we have to help our members and the people that work for us understand how they see themselves in those values, how they see their work in those values, and how the team sees their success in those values. And I think that if we're not consistently looking at that stuff and helping everyone new that we bring onto our team find themselves in those core values that have already been established, they don't know, they're not using the same common language. So every single person that comes onto our team, once these values were created, we don't go back to the drawing board and create brand new values. We still have these values. We've had them since the very beginning, since I became CEO 4 years ago. And these values haven't changed. But what we do every time a new person comes onto our team is we have a conversation as the whole team about what these values mean to us and how they show up in our work. So the new employees get to hear our existing employees, our seasoned employees, talk about our core values, what they mean to them, and how they show up in their work. So that from the very beginning, that employee gets a grasp of that common language that we all have. We also, if you notice here in the second one, how do we build them into the human systems? So human systems are, how do we build them into annual review processes? How do we weave them into how we set goals and assess if those goals have been achieved? How do we build them into how we assess if someone's a good culture fit for our team? How do we use them to assess if someone's a good candidate for a job that we're looking at? And so we've taken these 5 core values and we use them everywhere. There are questions about each of these 5 core values in our annual review process for each employee, where they didn't, what value they failed at, what value they did the best at. We use these as evaluation for anyone that we hire. So anyone who has any contact with a potential employee in an interview process assesses each candidate based on these 5 core values, where we ask them specific questions related to these things. And so we use these in all of our human systems so that they get woven into everything that we do. When we unveiled these to our team, we unveiled them 1 month at a time and had each member of the team reflect on that value, and then we came together on a call and talked about what that value meant to them. So they get something like this. This is how we did this is the grit one. Grit is a combination of passion, perseverance, and hard work. It's what's made us successful in our short history. The people who work for us possess the scrappy, grassroots, take nothing for granted, stick-to-itness. Stick-to-itness is something that one of our staff members specifically said. So every single one of our members talked about perseverance, passion, hard work, scrappy, grassroots, take nothing for granted, don't be humble. And so we tried to represent every single one of their words that made the word grit in the definition. So we have a deep commitment to our cause, the drive to see the goals long term, and the work ethic to do whatever it takes to push the goal forward. We value grit. We work hard, we don't quit. Why? Because we care deeply about our cause. So we'd send this out to our staff. This was month 2, so they got this the second month we started to unveil it. We asked them to reflect on how they represent grit in their life and what they do in their day-to-day life when they feel extra gritty. When they're failing at this value, what does that look like for them? And we came together as a team and had this conversation on a call so that they could start to conceptualize what those values actually mean in their work and how we can hold each other mutually accountable to this value as well. And because we use this as a part of our regular language, because it's a part of the human systems, it all of a sudden becomes part of the language that our staff uses on a regular basis, where now they'll use it as a part of our language when we're talking to one another, where they'll say, KJ, you are really gritty this week. I know you were traveling a ton and you had a bunch of deadlines for some stuff you needed to get done, and you just worked really hard and dug deep for that. And I just want to tell you, good job being gritty. Where they'll say that to one another. But I think you have to intentionally build that into the core values. And I think that that becomes the foundation, much like fraternity and sorority. In a perfect world, we'd want our fraternities and sororities to do this too, where we'd want them to be having regular conversations about what it means to live their values in their lives as fraternity and sorority members. And so we're taking that concept and we're applying it to how we build our team and how we can help them understand and use some common language just like our fraternities and sororities do. So that is the common core values. Does anyone have any questions about the core value stuff while we're here? You're welcome to sort of type in questions as we go. And I'll pause in between each one if you have questions before we move on to the next section. But I just want to make sure that if you have questions, I can leave you some time. Great. Well, feel free to continue to share. I'll move on to common goals. So the common goals piece, I think, is for young professionals something that they really, really want and something that they really, really need. The millennial generation in particular really likes having really clear expectations and really clear instructions about what it takes for them to be successful. And that's actually one of the things that I love about their generation is like they really just want you to outline for them what it takes for them to be successful. And I think what Common Goals does is it allows us to be a little bit more specific and remove. I know when I was in graduate school, I really didn't have a clear picture of what it took to be successful in my graduate student role. You know, I supervised a council when I was in graduate school, and I just knew that like there was some stuff that they had to do, and there were some meetings that they had to go to, and there were some events that they were going to host, and it was my job to make sure that they did that and didn't explode. And that for me was what I perceived to be the expectations of my role. And I think that when we set some common goals, not just for ourselves as a team, but for each individual within the team, I think it allows us to understand what it takes for us to be successful as a team, but also for me to be able to see my individual part in those goals and moving our division or our department or our office forward towards sort of the bigger picture goals. And so we look at how do we inspire a shared vision and over-communicate a shared vision. There's this book. It's called The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive, written by a man named Patrick Lencioni. Lencioni may sound like a familiar name to some of you. He's the guy who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He also wrote The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive. He's got a couple other books with some numbers in the title too. I think he just likes bullet-pointed lists. But anyway, one of the 4 obsessions of an extraordinary executive that he talked a lot about was over-communicating for organizational clarity. And I think that I apply this principle to when we talk about goals, and that we need to over-communicate that shared vision or those common goals, because that way it stays in front of people. I think if we talk about them at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester, we've missed a really big opportunity to ensure that those goals are getting achieved and that we're having those conversations about the way that we are heading as a group on a regular basis. One part of the book, he said, people need to hear things 6 different times in 3 different ways. And that to me has just really stuck, that people need to hear things 6 different times in 3 different ways in order for them to actually absorb it. And so thinking about how we talk about our goals, not just as a team, but as individuals, I think that we've got to figure out how we can continue to over-communicate those goals. I have a standing agenda item on our weekly call with every single one of our teams where I talk specifically about the goals and where we are in measurement to those goals that we've set. Some of those are financial, some of those are related to innovation, but that I talk about those every week. And some weeks, there's no update. The numbers and the information is the same as the week before. And I'm sure my staff sits there on the other end of the phone and like rolls their eyes like, oh, here we go again. But everybody knows where we are every week in terms of getting to our goals. And I think that that's sort of the idea of the over-communicate the common goals. And then how do we build those common goals to build individual goals? How do we use those to build the individual goals? What we want is we want to be able to say, here's where we're headed as a division or a department or an office. And then individually to say, okay, so coordinator A, coordinator B, assistant director C, how are you in your role going to help us get there? What are the things that you are going to be specifically responsible for? What are you going to take the lead on to help drive us towards that goal? Coordinator, what are you going to do to help drive us to this goal? And I think that we have to help our employees and our staff look at it from the big picture, but also from the small picture, from how they're individually going to contribute to those goals. I think a lot of times the goals that our individual staff members set are not necessarily focused on the big list of things that they know that they need to achieve in the year. And it's stuff that we do every year, right? It's stuff that we do regularly. So it's like recruitment, Greek week, speaker series, this anti-hazing week, this event, these advisor meetings. And we think in a very checklisting form in our industry, and I think we have to think about, okay, we know we have to do recruitment, but how can we take recruitment and infuse some of the things that we need in recruitment to drive us to the bigger goal, right? If our bigger goal is more engaged students in fraternity and sorority life, more engaged students in fraternity and sorority life. Okay, so who's in charge of recruitment? What can they do in recruitment to help us grow the number of engaged students in fraternity and sorority life? Not just students, but engaged students in fraternity and sorority life. So thinking about it from a global perspective, and then the stuff on their checklist, how are they going to use that checklisting stuff to then also get us to that larger scale goal as well. And then I think the biggest piece of it is how do we make those goals measurable? So when we think about that, okay, so if we have these goals, how do we take those things and say, here's how we know that they'll be achieved. Here's how we know that they'll be successful. Here's how we know that we can check it off the list. And I think that there's a lot of ambiguity in what success actually looks like when it comes to some of the stuff that we do, right? When we think about recruitment is my example all the time because that's my homeland, that's where I live. When we think about recruitment, well, we know that the goal for most Panhellenic communities is match as many people as possible, right? Place as many women as possible into the recruitment process. Okay. That's great, but how would we know in recruitment that we as an office have done our job? How would we know as an institution when recruitment is over that we've succeeded? And it's not just how many women do we place in sororities, but what are the other measurables? And if we don't have a way to currently assess those measurables, how can we build some assessment mechanisms for us to know if we were successful or not? We can't just let it be, okay, it's done, we survived, nothing imploded, only 5 angry parents called us and 2 alumni, we're good, let's move on. We've got to think about, well, how do we know we're successful? And how do we know that recruitment was good and not just because we didn't have to deal with any drama? And so I think that being able to delineate what all those things are for our staff members gives them a better picture about what is expected of them at work. One of the core indicators in this book, it's called First Break All the Rules by a man named Marcus Buckingham. Marcus Buckingham partnered with Gallup, where they came up with 12 identifiers that tell you whether an employee is going to be engaged, satisfied, and retained in their job. And when it comes to common goals, one of the qualifiers that they came up with was, do I know what is expected of me at work? Do I know what success looks like in my job? And has someone talked to me about my progress in the last 6 months? So that other piece isn't just, okay, we have to find big goals. We have to over-communicate those big goals. We have to help our individuals identify their goals and how their goals fit in the bigger picture. We have to help them take their goals and make them measurable so that we know that they've succeeded or not and what those measurements of success are. And we have to consistently check in on those goals to talk about like every week. This gives us standing agenda items for those one-on-ones that we have with our staff members, where we can check in on those measurable things that we helped them build related to their individual goals and how they fit in the bigger picture. So we have to be able to have some of that stuff built in so we can measure it, we consistently check in on it, and that we ask them, okay, so if you're off track, if you're not achieving these goals, or if we don't meet these desired outcomes, what do you want me to do to hold you accountable? We're not talking about like, okay, well then just fire me because if I can't meet those goals then I'm bad at my job. Well, no, that's not what we're talking about. But what do you want me to do to hold you accountable to those goals? Do you want me to text you every day? Do you want me to pop into your office and ask you about them every day to the point of you might be mad at me because I'm checking in so regularly? Do you want me to email hound you? Do you want me to take you to lunch and walk it and we can talk through it? Like, we have to build those accountability mechanisms in there as well. When we build the accountability mechanisms in, it takes the pressure off of the relationship between you and that employee and puts the responsibility into the agreement that you made. So if I'm just hounding you because you're not getting something done, then I feel like I'm being a nag, and the employee probably feels like I'm being a nag and a mean person and bothering the crap out of them. But if before that happens, we have a conversation where I say, okay, if you're not getting this stuff done, what do you want me to do to hold you accountable? And that employee specifically says, I want you to ask me every day what's going on with it until I have an update for you. And then when I start asking you every day and you get frustrated, I can say, listen, we agreed on this, that if you didn't have this stuff done, you wanted me to ask you every day until you had an update. Is there something different you want me to do, or do you want me to keep doing it until you have an update for me? And so we put the power in the agreement that we made instead of in the individual. I'm just doing what you've asked me, and I'm just trying to help you be successful. So when we look at, okay, so we have core values. We've established a foundation of mutual accountability. We've now set the goals where we've said, okay, here are the goals. Here's how I fit individually in that bigger picture. Here's how I know I will be successful. Here's what I want to happen if I'm not successful, and here's my supervisor checking in on me regularly. And then we can ask them to reflect on those things as well. So we ask for the Fired Up employees, one of the things we ask them at the beginning of the year is, so this is our reason for being for all three companies. We use this is sort of like a mission statement. We use a reason for being just because mission statements felt a little too corporate-y for me. And so we ask them, as we're building goals how will we as a company achieve our reason for being in the next year? So we have 3 different individual sections of our company. We have the education piece, the technology piece, and the marketing piece. And so we ask our education people, how will we achieve our reason for being in the next year? We ask our technology people to do the same and our marketing people to do the same. And then we ask each individual on the team, how will we know we've achieved our goals, and how will I know I've achieved my goals? At the beginning of every year, we do that. So we usually come together at some point in January where we set goals as a company, where we talk about how will we achieve our reason for being. We talk about how we individually will set our own goals within that, and how do we know that those goals are achieved. And then individually, the supervisors talk through those goals with their staff member at the beginning of the year, and that those goals are checked in regularly with each staff member throughout the year. Okay, I'm going to go on. So when we think about core values, common goal, those things are functions. I think the foundation of those 2 things is the relationships. And I think that the relationships are the most important piece of the equation. They are what makes everything work in supervisory relationships. There is this delicate balance, though, that we have to figure out between I'm your friend and I'm your supervisor. But what I know is that those relationships become critical to the success, not only of the supervisor-supervisee relationship, but of that employee's success based on their relationship with their supervisor. So we have to think about, like, how do I build meaningful and appropriate relationships with each member of my team? And what does that look like for them? How do we make regular, consistent time for our team members? But then also, how do we make sure that our team members are doing the same with each other, that they're building relationships with each other? When we talk about that Marcus Buckingham book, First Break All the Rules, there was a couple pieces in there that were 100% about relationships. One of the questions was, do I have a best friend at work? Do I have a best friend at work? If people can identify that they have a best friend at work, whether it's in their direct office or not, if they have a best friend at work, it is one of the strongest indicators for job satisfaction and retention in their job if they feel like they have a best friend at the job. The other one, I think I pulled the quote for you all just because I think it's so important. The talented employee may join the company because of its charismatic leaders, its generous benefits, and its world-class training programs. But how long that employee stays and how productive he is while he is there is determined by his relationship with his immediate supervisor. So that relationship with the supervisor becomes really, really important, where they ask, the question that they ask in the 12 points that they came up with was, do I feel like my supervisor cares about me as a person? Not just as a staff member or as an employee or as a cog in the wheel, but do I feel like they care about me as a person? And so we have to figure out how to foster an environment where relationships are prioritized, not just between staff members, but between supervisors and supervisees. So I learned this the hard way. This was probably the hardest lesson that I learned in my job of just how important the relationships piece really was. A couple of years ago, I went through a pretty traumatic, we'll call it 4 months, in the middle of 2015. I had a couple surgeries in March of 2015. We had an adoption fall through in April of 2015, and then in May of 2015, we got a call with 24 hours notice that we had been picked to adopt a child, and then the very next day that child was born. And so I went from like being off work, going through some stuff where I wasn't really emotionally accessible to my team, and then going on maternity leave for 4 weeks. And when I came off of maternity leave, I hit August, which is our busiest time of year, and I hit the road for pretty much the entire month straight. I looked up mid-September from the fog that happens in August to all of us. You all know what I'm talking about. August and September are sort of foggy. I looked up from that was mad at me. And I had no idea why. I was like, why are you mad at me? Like, I've been working hard. I just came off maternity leave and went straight on the road. I've been hustling. Like, why is everybody mad at me? I didn't do anything to you. And I couldn't figure out why everyone was mad at me. And it was probably the most humbling experience of my life. And there were so many conversations that I had to have with our staff to get to the bottom of what was going on. And at the bottom of it all was that they didn't get any time with me from mid-March until mid-October. So roughly 7 months of time, they didn't get any FaceTime with their boss. At that time, everyone on the Fired Up team was reporting to me, which was a bad decision to begin with. But everyone on the Fired Up team was reporting to me, and nobody got any FaceTime with their supervisor, with the exception of a random call here and there from me just to check in to make sure that they were doing okay. But they didn't get enough time for me. And so what happened is people made assumptions about what that meant. People made assumptions about what that meant, and they thought that it meant that I didn't think they were doing their job, or I didn't think that they were good at their job, or that I was mad at them about something. And then the rumors started to spin within the company. And somebody was mad at somebody, and then that somebody told me, and then I said something to that somebody, and it just got very, very ugly. So by the middle of October, everything was my fault, and everyone was mad at me. Looking back on it now, I see what the problem was, but in the thick of it, it was really, really painful. And it was honestly some of the darkest moments of my professional career. I'll be really honest with you. I began to question my ability to do my job at all. And what I had to do out of that dark, dark space that I was in, I had to think about, okay, how do I now repair these relationships and help my staff understand that I care about them as a person? And I had to spend time with them, FaceTime, individual one-on-one time, where I had to be in front of them, caring about them as a person and caring about their work that they were doing for us. And so for the next couple of months, I sat down individually with each of our team members and took them to lunch and invited them to my home for dinner and spent some time with them in the office. And for our remote staff, I flew to where they were and spent several days working with them. I'd go to dinner with them and their spouses or their significant others. We'd spend time together working. We'd talk about how their fall was. We'd talk about the goals for the coming year. And I had to build those relationships back again by giving them my time so that they felt like they could trust me again. And I think that those relationships, I learned how important that face time is with our staff members. And so now what I do is I try to spend individual time with each staff member on a weekly basis based on how I know that they best receive my time. So I use the 5 love languages. I have every single one of our staff members take the 5 love language quiz. For those of you who aren't familiar, there's this book. It's about relationships. Mostly it's about romantic relationships, but I think it applies to working relationships. I'm pretty sure they have a working relationships version now, but I make everyone take the romantic version because it's basically the same thing. So the premise of this book is that everyone has a way that they give and receive love from people. Those 5 ways are acts of service, so doing things for other people, gifts, not like I'm going to buy you a car, but like small tokens that you give to people to let them know, hey, I saw this and I thought of you. touch, which is like hugs, pats on the back, high fives. Some people really value personal touch. Quality time. So being told they're doing a good job, being told what they're doing well, getting that affirmation on a regular basis. So I have each of our staff members take that love language quiz. And so the premise of that is it is the way that we show that we care for people, but it is also the way that we receive care from people. So my love languages are affirmation and touch, which is really great when you're the CEO of a company because, you know, you get lots of really good affirmation on a regular basis, y'all. I know that some of my directors and higher ups on the call feel that pain as well. But my love languages are affirmation and personal touch. If I have a staff member whose love language is quality time, it doesn't matter how many compliments I give them and how good of a job I tell them that they're doing. That's not what they need from me. What they need from me is for me to spend an hour of my undivided attention with them. And so I try to look at what my staff needs based on their love languages. That's one. The second thing is when I meet with staff members, the first 15 to 20 minutes of time of every meeting I have with them, we spend totally on life updates. How's your life? What's going on? How's your new dog? How's your significant other? What's going on with your mom? Is she still sick? Where I can make a personal investment in their lives and in what's going on with their life. They're willing to share that stuff with me. It's never anything that they're not willing to share. And I am willing to share certain things with them. So I'm open with my staff members about stuff that's going on with my life. They usually ask about my daughter. They ask about my dogs. They ask about my husband and all of his obsessions with sports teams. And so we talk about that stuff for a little while. And then we say, okay, let's talk about work. What's on your agenda? What's going on? What can we talk through? Let's talk about those goals. Let's talk about where you are in those statuses that we talked about last week. And then we get down to business. But I always make time on the front end to let them know that I'm invested in your life. I care about you as a person, and I want to know how things are going. I have some staff members that are more open than others, and that's okay. But I think that that time up front is important. When I talk about relationships with staff members, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have them to dinner at your house once a week or once a month. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to hang out with them outside of the office all the time, although we spend a lot of time outside of the office in student-run events anyway, so we're hanging out with them pretty casually most of the time anyway. But I mean that we have to make some time, formally or informally, where we show we care about their life and not just their job. And I think that that's the relationship piece. There was a question. It says, in the beginning of the year, are you hearing from the new staff, or are they tending to be less heard because of the more tenured team members? Let me just make sure I'm understanding this question. In the beginning of the year, are you hearing from the new staff, or are they tending to be less heard because of the more tenured team members? I think that that's just a function of people being comfortable in the team. What's interesting is my Fired Up team has a lot of really big personalities. Many of you know who they are, but I have lots of big personalities on my team, and I think that every time we bring someone new onto the team, we have a conversation with our existing team about how we are a little much for people in the beginning and that I need everybody to tone it down and remember that these people are new and that we need to give them space to also feel safe and feel like their voice can be heard as well. So that's a conversation that we have to have. I don't know if that actually answers your question. And then as a supervisor, how do we build relationships with our staff and then hold them accountable when the program or position is voluntary? I think that's a great question. I think that that's asking them about, okay, so what are the goals that you have for this position? What do you want to achieve as a part of this position? And how do you want me to hold you accountable if you don't meet those goals? I think it's also reasonable if we're talking about people who, at a headquarters level, who supervise volunteers. I think it's perfectly acceptable for you to have some expectations of those volunteers up front, where you say, if you do not meet these expectations, these are the consequences of those things. And I think that we don't always have those conversations when we're talking to volunteers, because it's a lot harder to fire someone who's giving us work for free. And I get that. So we have to make sure that we set the same expectations with them up front of, like, here's what's expected of you as a volunteer, and if you're not meeting those expectations, here's what's going to happen, and making sure that they understand those things before they get into those positions. So the hardest time I have with my supervisor is being made to feel less and like I have to learn from them. I think this could fall in the relationship category. How do I cope with this? I'm sorry you're having this experience, whoever put this question in. I think that this is one of the things that frustrates me a lot about our industry. With people in our industry, there is what I would call the old guard. We're like the grumpy old alumni in the back of the room. I've lumped myself with most of those people because I'm getting to that age where if you're in the industry more than 12 or 13 years, you're an old dog, and I classify in that category. And I hate that our younger professionals in our industry feel like, from those of us that have been in the industry longer than them, whether it's a lot longer or a little bit longer, treating them like, because they're out of graduate school or because they're new to the industry, that they don't know as much as us and that they have a lot to learn. And I think that that's how we get ourselves into trouble. And I think that what we have to start understanding is there is so much that we, the old people, can learn from the new generation of professionals coming into our industry, because we're working on a new generation of fraternity and sorority members, and we're going to need some fresh perspectives and some new ideas for the challenges that we're facing in this new generation of college students. And so I think that that's a big piece of it. I also think for those of you that are encountering some challenges with your supervisor, I think you've got to be upfront and honest with them about how you're feeling. I think that I was always afraid to address concerns with supervisors because we're taught not to stand up to supervisors, especially if you're female. We're taught not to stand up for ourselves. And so I think you have to be honest. I think you have to be upfront with them, and I think you have to tell them how you're feeling. And I say that to my staff all of the time. I say, I can't fix problems that I don't know exist. And so if your supervisor doesn't know that those statements make you feel upset or sad or uncomfortable or devalued, then they can't fix it. And so what we have to do is, I need you to sit down with them and say, hey, you've said it to me a couple of times, this phrase. And when you say that phrase to me, here's how it makes me feel. I know that I don't know everything in the industry, but I really want to learn, and I'm really, really trying. And it makes me feel like you don't value me when you say that, or however it makes you feel. But you have to tell them that you feel that way, otherwise they can't fix the behavior. I suggest first saying something about it. If you don't get anywhere there, you let me know and we can talk through it. Great question. How would you navigate sharing personal information if when a team member is uninterested in sharing it? Great question. I think that we have to show a little bit of openness first in order for people to feel comfortable showing openness as well. And I think that some people are just a little bit or a lot of bit more private about their personal lives. And so some people take a lot longer to build trust with when it comes to personal information. And I think that you can share pieces of yourself and talk about your family or your significant other or your pets or your vacation or whatever, and reciprocate the question back to them. But if they don't want to open up yet, they're not going to open up. What you have to continue to do as a supervisor, though, is to continue to ask and to continue to show an interest so that they know that you're going to continue to be interested and that you are still interested. So eventually you sort of peel back those layers. You have some staff members that will take a really long time. I have some, on my tech side, I have some developers that take a really long time to open up. And I think it's just because they don't really talk to people on a daily basis as it is. They just kind of type to each other and they chat with each other. And so what I've learned is that I can get my developers and my tech team to open up more to me than if I chat with them than if I sit face to face with them and try to get to know them. Some of the interviews that I've done for some of the developers that we've hired were really uncomfortable, but then when I chat with them after we hire them, they like open up like books. And so maybe it's about the medium too, and I would look at that. Maybe it's about texting like, hey, checking in, how you doing, everything okay? Or if you have a chat feature or whatever, using those, and you might get a little bit more of them from there. So I just got a note from Becky. Becky, this is sort of the last slide that we're on here, so that's why I just started taking the questions. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between a more seasoned supervisor and an entry-level supervisee? Specifically, learning how to let go and allowing the supervisee to take on those tough duties in order to gain meaningful experience. Because the boss is seasoned, they already have the experience. Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I think that this is a lesson that I learned very early from my supervisor in graduate school, Jeremiah Shin. He was a great supervisor, and I learned a lot of really great lessons from him. So a little shout out to Jeremiah. But one of the things I remember is I was sitting in his office. He had been at Indiana for 3 months. I was a bratty graduate student who was like, what's this guy know? He's new. We were sitting there talking about the council that I advised was Multicultural Greek Council, and they had planned a retreat for the entire community, so for every member organization, which was 8 organizations and a total of about maybe 150 total students. And so we were sitting there talking about the planning of the retreat for Multicultural Greek Council, and he said, Jess, it sounds like you're doing a lot of the work and for the retreat, and I'm wondering why the students aren't doing more. And I said to him, because I want it to happen, and I don't want it to and if it failed. And I think that that was one of the most powerful questions that I've ever been asked professionally, what would happen if it failed? And I think when you think about a Multicultural Greek Council retreat, there's places, that's a place where a little bit of failure isn't a crisis, right? That there's some powerful learning that comes out of that failure. And I think that our job as a supervisor isn't just to give them opportunities to learn and grow and to take on more responsibility, but also to let them fail, because some of the most powerful learning comes from that self-discovery. And so my question back to you would be, are there opportunities that we can give them to learn and grow and create some experiences that learning moments can happen from if they do happen to fail? There are certainly some things that we can't let fail. There are certainly some things that are sort of no-fail projects that maybe we do have to intervene in some instances, but I think that there's lots of opportunity in our work to let failure happen and to use that as a learning experience and as a professional development experience for our younger staff members. As a supervisor for volunteer staff at a headquarters, how do you ensure continued mandatory learning opportunities for volunteer staff? I think that you set that as an expectation up front. I think that you set an expectation up front for what it means to be a volunteer, but also a part of that expectation is continual learning opportunities for them and that they're expected to participate in those. I think that most people don't do that stuff because they didn't know it was an expectation to begin with. And I think if we set those expectations up front, I think that they're going to know that that's a part of the commitment. And if they don't commit to it, then that they may lose their volunteer position. How do you think managing up intersects with building meaningful and appropriate relationships? I get managed up all the time. And I think that the being managed up by my people, I think I take a lot better because I have the relationships with them. And I think that they feel like they can manage up to me because I have a relationship with them already. And so I think that the relationship piece is really the important piece to making sure that I can manage down, but also they can manage up as well. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that, where did my mouse go? I'm going to look back at your question. I think that, how does it intersect with building meaningful and appropriate relationships? I think that it is the responsibility of the supervisor to prioritize the relationship building. But I also think that if you are not getting that from your supervisor now, then you should ask for it. And I think that that is the first step to that piece of it. I think that that's the managing up piece of building meaningful and appropriate relationships with your supervisor. I think that you have to ask for it and tell them that that's something that's important to you and that something you believe will make your working relationship stronger. And ask them to lunch or ask them to grab coffee with you or ask for your one-on-one to be 10 minutes up front talking about your lives and then the rest of it talking about work stuff. And I think that as a supervisor, if I had an employee tell me that, I think that I would be more than happy to oblige that. And so I think that that might be how you manage up, is to start first by asking for it. But I think that that priority has to come from the supervisor. But if they don't understand that as a core principle to supervision, how do you set up an environment for your supervisees to feel comfortable giving feedback to one another or to you as their supervisor? Great question. From employee to employee, I think we set that expectation up front that that first the way we resolve conflict or first the way that we hold each other accountable is with each other, right? So if I see something happen, if I'm a coordinator and I see something happen with another coordinator, I first am responsible for addressing it directly with that coordinator. If I don't feel like I get a satisfactory response from that interaction or from that conversation, then I'm able to go to their direct supervisor or my direct supervisor to help them, for them to help me resolve the issue or to bring it to someone's attention. But we sort of set that expectation with our staff up front when it comes to peer-to-peer accountability, that they're supposed to hold each other accountable, and if they don't feel like they've gotten anywhere, then they can come to their immediate supervisor. I have staff members come to me and say, oh my gosh, so-and-so did this the other day, and my first response is, well, did you talk to them about it? Well, no, I thought I would talk to you first about it. I need you to talk to them about it first, and then if you need my help resolving the issue, I will help. but we always sort of defer them back to the peer-to-peer relationships first. When it comes to them holding me accountable as a supervisor, that's a conversation we have every year as a part of the annual review. So when they prepare for their annual review, what they get is they get a series of questions that are based on our values and that are based on their goals for the year. So they get asked questions about, how do you believe you exemplified the values of the company? What values do you think you best exemplify? What value do you want to work on? Did you achieve your goals for 2017? If you didn't achieve those goals, talk about why you don't think you did. What do you think are some goals you want to set for next year? And then the last section is, tell me about your relationship with your supervisor, with me. What can I do better? What did I fail at as your supervisor? What are some things you need from me? And they fill that evaluation out. And I look at it before we have a conversation, and then we sit down and we have a conversation about it. And at the very end, the thing we end on is, how can I be better for you? And what are some things that I did not do well for you this year that I can do better? And so that's a regular conversation we're having. And with some employees, they're pretty comfortable saying, Jess, you told me you were going to get this to me, or Jess, I needed this from you, you didn't do that. But I have some younger employees that maybe haven't known me as long, that I have to say to them, if there's a problem or if there's something that you need from me that you're not getting, I need you to ask for it, or I need you to tell me that that's happening. Or if you're upset with me, I need you to feel comfortable and safe that you can say that. And so it's just about how you set the expectations up front in the relationship, and that you continually do that every year, and that you continue to vocalize and over-communicate that stuff to them. If there's a problem, I want you to feel like you can tell me. And they slowly will get used to that stuff. I think it's not an immediate, but I think that they slowly become more and more comfortable having those conversations with you. I took this position with a role hoping to oversee a staff member. I've been searching for over a year for the right fit. My supervisor recently left. Now the VP is discussing a restructure. A hold was put on my hire. I actually think the VP is going to share his decision at 3:30. I'm a little nervous. He's going to say I will never be able to hire a staff member. How do I advocate to a VP about needing help and desiring for this development in my professional career? I think that you've got to, I think that desiring the ability to supervise issues. And I think the issues that VPs concern themselves with when we're dealing with an employee that's maybe 2 or 3 steps down from them is, do we need another staff member in this office? And is it worth the money? Is the return on the investment there? And so I think that that's what you have to address with the VP. And you have to make a case for why you need them, how much time you need them for, what things they would do that you don't have time for, or what groups of students they would support that are not being supported currently. I think that that piece for development is got to come later. So if in the end they don't allow you to hire another employee, then you need to talk to your direct supervisor and say, I desire to have experience supervising people, whether it be a professional staff member, a graduate student. I desire to have that experience. How can I get some of that experience, or can you help me find that experience? So I think that you've got to separate those two issues from one another, because the VP is not terribly concerned at this point with the professional development of someone 2 steps down, right? He's got 2 vacancies in a department, and he's got to make a decision about what that all looks like. And so I think that you've got to advocate for what your department needs. And then once you get what your department needs, if your needs aren't getting met, then you need to advocate for your needs. And if you're not going to get those needs met, then maybe you need to look at where you can get those needs met. I tried to discuss my issues with my students I was interacting with, and I was told I had anger issues. How do I cope? What should I do for myself, and what should I do for my relationship with my supervisor? I think that I'm trying to collect my thoughts because I'm angry for you. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, the supervisor told you had anger issues, and you're wondering how you should address that with your supervisor, and also what should you do for yourself. No, let me read that again. I tried to discuss my issues with the students I was interacting with, and I was told I had anger issues. How do I cope? What should I do for myself, and what should I do with my relationship with my supervisor? I think that it would be important for you to, A, reflect upon the conversation you were having with your students and what state of mind you were in and how your students may have received those messages. I think one of the big mistakes that we make sometimes is we use staff members, volunteers, or even students as a place to vent and as a place to get our concerns validated by going down the chain. And they're always going to get validated down the chain because because they're down the chain instead of up the chain. And I think that one of the mistakes that we make is we complain to people that we shouldn't be complaining to, and we burden people that we shouldn't be burdening with some of the dramatic or some of the relationship-oriented pieces of our job. And so I want you to think about, as a student, how those messages might have been received, and maybe think through, was that an appropriate place to be venting those issues? And if not, how can you repair that relationship? I think when you were venting about issues, important, and I think that you and I need to work on that piece of it. Would you be willing to work on that with me? And I think that sometimes that's really hard to hear as a supervisor. I had to hear it a couple of years ago where people said, I need to work on my relationship with you. Would you work on it with me? And sometimes the most humbling thing to say is yes, but you have to make the effort. I think that we can't sit around and expect people to read our minds that we're having a hard time or that we need something if we can't advocate for ourselves. And so I would encourage you to ask your supervisor to work on your relationship and to do that work. I've been working for Fired Up I'm in my 11th year, and Josh Arendi and I have known each other a really long time. He's like a brother to me. I love him as a person, and I respect the hell out of him as a business owner. But he and I see things very differently, and he and I are pretty regularly in disagreements with one another about pretty much everything. We have a lot of difference of opinions, and those difference of opinions in most cases are really, really good for us as a company. Early on, when I wasn't as mature and I wasn't as informed and I wasn't as level-headed as maybe I am, or as experienced as I am with relationships, he and I would just get in these fights, and they would be really toxic because we would disagree about a topic, but then it would become personal for some reason or another. And it got to the point where he and I had to make a really concerted effort to work on the personal relationship, because it wasn't really the working relationship that was causing the discord. It was the personal relationship and just the differences in the way that we saw the world. And yeah, he and I still disagree a lot, but we have a lot more respect for one another. We have a lot more trust in the relationship, and we've spent a lot of time, a lot of really intentional time working on that stuff. But I think the reality is, y'all, relationships, like, they're just not perfect, and they're complicated and they're messy. And even the best of friends are going to disagree and have arguments and be mad at each other. And I think that we have to stop expecting perfection out of the relationships and the people that we have relationships with, because they're just not, it's just not realistic, right? Like, your supervisor is going to disappoint you. People that you supervise are going to disappoint you. They're not going to be there when you need them. They're going to drop the ball on something you needed them to help with. They're going to fail. They're going to mess something up. They're going to say something that was unintentionally insensitive. They're going to say something that was intentionally insensitive. And at the end of the day, all of that stuff happens in every relationship that matters. And what makes the work that we do important is because that we understand that those relationships are still important, and that just because something happened in that relationship doesn't mean we get to walk away from it. And so we have to continue to do that work with the people that we are in relationship with and in this journey with in the profession, right? If we can't model healthy relationships for our students in the office, then what model do they have to look for? And I think that we have to stop expecting that those relationships are going to be perfect, because no relationship is. And we have to just be a little bit more forgiving of everyone. And I think that when we do that, forgive some of the little missteps that happen in the relationships. Let me get to more of these questions. I feel like my supervisor is generally approachable. I also feel like there's a point where there is a modicum of micromanagement and not allowing me or my team to perform without moving things past them first. How would you suggest handling this? I would say that exact thing to your supervisor. I would say, I feel like there's a point where I have to run everything past you, or everything that my team does past you, and it makes me feel micromanaged, and it makes my team feel like you don't trust us to do the work. And I think that then you can ask, like, what is the best way for us to make sure that you feel like you're in the loop, but for us to not feel like we're being micromanaged? And I think that they may not even realize that they're doing it. It may just be that they need to know, right? Like, I have a high need to know everything that's going on. I have a low need to micromanage people, but sometimes my high need to know turns into me being a micromanager. And so I sometimes don't even know that I'm doing it until somebody says, you're micromanaging me. And I'm like, oh, nope, you're right. I totally am. I'm so sorry about that. I just need to know. Just keep me in the loop. And so I think I would just say that exact thing to them and say, listen, this is how I feel. I don't know if you're intending it to feel this way. How can we fix this? I supervise 2 graduate students. How would you recommend balance respecting their academic priorities while still holding them accountable to their work responsibilities and presence? Great question. Grad school is hard, you guys. Remember grad school? It was so hard. It was so hard. It was so much writing and so much work. And I think that when you come into graduate school, you're like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you're excited, and you want to say yes to everything, and you take a full course load, and you say yes to the graduate assistant, and then like somewhere around October, you're like, oh my gosh, this is hard. And you realize you've bitten off way more than you can chew. And I think that as supervisors who've lived through those experiences, what we have to do in the beginning is we have to prepare them for that, to say, listen, I know that you're really excited, and I know that you're going to start your classes, and we're going to start doing this graduate assistantship, and you're going to be really gung-ho, and then somewhere in October, you're going to have like 6 papers due, and they're all 12 pages long, and you have 400 pages to read in a textbook that is the driest material you've ever read in your entire life. and you're going to be like, how the hell am I going to get all this done, plus do my 20 hours in the office, plus attend this event at 9 p.m. tomorrow night, plus make sure my students are feeling supported. So let's talk about what's going to happen when you get there and how we can make sure that you're balancing your coursework and your academic responsibilities, and you're wanting to do your job and supporting our students. So let's have that conversation about when we get there, what we're going to do about it and how we're going to manage. And I think that whatever you decide, you just need to have that conversation with them up front, because I think we've lived through that experience, and what we have to do is we have to prepare them for that lived experience and maybe have a conversation about it before it happens, so that when they get there, they can walk into your office and feel safe saying, remember that time we talked about when I was going to have a lot of stuff to do for school and feel totally overwhelmed by the job? I'm there. And that then you can talk about, okay, so how do we make sure everybody's getting what they need? How would you relate the information discussed today to student staff? Ooh, good question. I think that you've got to help your students in the common goal and in the relationships piece of it, as we do for our full-time paid staff, as we do for our graduate students. And so generally, I think that when we take the time to include them in some of those conversations, they're far more bought into doing their student job with excellence. And so I think that having those same conversations, whoever their supervisor is, having the same conversations with them, letting them be a part of the values conversation, letting them be a part of the big picture conversation, and helping them create goals too of how they'll help drive your office forward, and then encouraging them to create relationships with the people in the office as well, and you're encouraging your office to create relationships and show an investment in your students, I think can be just as important. What are the best practices for working with a co-supervisor who is another functional area on campus? We share the same GA. Those are never easy. So I don't envy anybody that has to do this. That's a really challenging job, and I think that you two need to be on the same page in terms of, okay, here's what I'm doing with this employee, here's what you're doing with this employee, let's have a conversation about how we can work together to support them in terms of relationships, in terms of their healthy balance, all of that. But I think we also have to make sure that they are orientated to what you're doing, right? And I think it's healthy for you to share, okay, so here's what I'm doing with this employee, here's how we're orienting them to what we're doing, so that maybe they can mirror that stuff on their side. But I think that you've still got to do those pieces with your employee. I think that the communication you have with their other co-supervisor regularly is important. And I think that if you all can focus some time on relationship between the three of you, maybe like once a month doing a joint meeting with the three of you, I think could be really valuable, because if you have trust with their co-supervisor, then maybe there won't be as much competition for time with that employee. Any recommendations about working with millennials in particular? We supervise a lot of grads who are heavily involved in college and feel that they don't need to grow anymore. And for the things that they don't know, they don't ask for help. There's so much to love about millennials, but there is so much that I think for those of us that are not millennials, they're very challenging for us to work with, because they're different than us. And I think that one of the greatest things that we can do for our millennial friends is to provide them opportunities to succeed, but also provide them opportunities where they fail. I think that that is one of the more powerful lessons for our millennial students is to let them fail. And I don't mean give them some things that they'll fail at so they fail. I mean, give them opportunities, but allow them to fail in those opportunities if it happens. I think I have a couple of millennial employees right now, and I think some of their most powerful professional experiences that they've had have been the failures. For some of them, they've been very debilitating experiences because they've never failed in their lives, and it's a very challenging experience for them to go through. But I think once they go through that, you have the ability to help if they're asking for it. I don't know how to, there's not a good way to like make fail or provide them opportunities. You don't want to set them up for failure, but I think the failure piece is really a big piece of the equation for the millennials. I think that once they experience the failure, they start to understand that they don't have all the answers and that they do need to learn more. What are some suggestions when it comes to good ways to manage up? I think that most managers that need to be managed up are because they are unaware what they're doing. Now, I don't think that most managers that need to be managed up are malicious in any of their intents. I don't think that they are intentionally doing any of the things that they're doing and understanding the consequences or the aftermath or the wake of what they're leaving behind. And so I think the best way that you can manage up is to advocate for your needs with your supervisor and to be honest and upfront about the experience that you're having with them and how you're receiving the management that they are giving you. I think that most of the time they don't even know that what they're causing is a negative experience or that they're making it hard for other people to do their job. And so I think that you've just got to get to a place where you can advocate and let them know that what's happening and how it's making you feel or the experience that you're having with that stuff. Because I think that that is the biggest piece. I don't think they even know. And I think that that's the biggest piece of it. You've just got to tell them. How well was using the love language quizzes received, especially from individuals that might not be in their comfort level? I think generally most people loved it. Most of my staff went on to use their professional development budget to buy the book. And I think that the way that I framed it was like, I want you to take this quiz because this will give me an opportunity to understand how I can show you that I care about you as an employee and for the rest of your team to show that they care about you as a coworker. And I think it's all about the way that you frame it. I think if you just walk in the office one day and be like, okay, everybody, we're going to take this quiz. It's called the 5 Love Languages. It's about the way that you give and receive love, and then just have them take that quiz. They may not be as open to it. I think if they understand why you want them to take the quiz and what they're going to get out of it, I think that they're a little bit more open to it. Some of them have probably already taken it. So I've been in a director position for just about a year, and I'm wondering what is the advice on building accountability with a staff member who has been at the institution for several years longer than me, but is underperforming. I'm just nodding, thinking about some of those instances in my life. I think that as their supervisor, what you have to continue to do is set measurable outcomes for them. So ways that you can measure their success and measure their productivity and measure that they are performing in their role. And when they do not, you have to document it. Because at some point, if they do not begin performing, then we're having a different conversation. And I think that one of the hardest things to do is to fire someone. But I think that if you have data that shows that they've been underperforming and not meeting their measurable goals consistently, it's a lot easier to advocate for that decision or to. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems, is that we often don't have data that shows that people are underperforming. We just know because we're doing their job for them. And so we have to build ways that can actually show that they're doing the work or they're not. It also gives you the ability to say, why aren't you getting this stuff done? Like, this is the measurable ways that we're figuring this stuff out. And this is the measurable ways that we're figuring this stuff out, and you're not getting that stuff done. So how can we figure out how you can get this stuff done? Or maybe this isn't the right role for you anymore. Here's what I have found. When people begin underperforming, most of the time it is not because they're lazy, and it's not because they're bad at their job. It's because they have lost passion for the role or lost passion for the place where they are employed. And that underperformance is a symptom of the fact that they've lost the connection to the job or the connection to the place of employment, especially if they started off performing and then slowly started underperforming. And so when we set measurable criteria for people and they continually don't meet those criteria and they don't meet those expectations, I think it's easier to help them see that they've lost the passion for it, and that maybe the next decision is for them to move on than have to go through a more official way for them to be removed from their position. There are some people that are just terrible at their job. There are some people that are lazy, but they are consistently lazy and they are consistently terrible at their jobs. But I think if you see people that have gone from performing and then begin underperforming, it's because that the passion has gone, or they're looking to leave. And so we either have to help them transition to the next thing or realize that what they need to do is transition to the next thing. And I think first by helping them set measurable criteria and then having conversations with them along the way about why they're not meeting that criteria, I think that they sort of come to that conclusion on their own. Okay, last question. How do you balance wanting to learn from new folks in the industry with teaching humility? I encounter lots of graduate students who want to be a part of every decision professional staff makes, which isn't realistic. How do you balance that desire to learn with teaching them? Is this the way that it goes sometimes? Yeah, I think that that's a great question. I think that there's lots of young staff that want to be involved in every decision, and I think that that's just not realistic or appropriate for them to be involved in every decision. I think that when you do have the opportunity to share with them how the decision was made, who was a part of that decision-making process, and why you came to that decision, I think that if you can share that process with them, that becomes the learning opportunity. They don't actually have to physically be a part of the decision, but if they can hear about how that decision was made, I think that that still becomes a professional development opportunity. And to also help them understand, like, here's why we made that decision without involving a lot of people, and that you can help them understand that that's some of those decisions as well. I think we all have those experiences in our career where there was a decision made without us and we weren't happy about it, but we understand why the decision was made without us. And I think that if we can go back to those experiences and help them understand the same experiences that we had as a young professional, I think it makes them feel like they're not alone, but then also including them in, like, so here's why we made that decision, here's some of the things we talked about, here's ultimately why we came to this conclusion within the reason of what's reasonable for you to share. I think if you can share that with them, I think it makes them feel a little bit more included. And also sharing with them some of the experiences where you felt that way too. Okay.
Okay,
Well,
so I'm jumping back on.
Great. Thanks, Becky.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jess. It looks like we're approaching our time. I know we did have some additional questions, so I think you might have a slide with how they could reach out to you if they wanted to finish up with those questions as well. We really appreciate you taking time out of your week and spend with members of the association. Your insights have really proven valuable, and I know I was writing a lot of notes too as a supervisor and what we could take away. So thank you all for your participation, offering great questions, and we hope you took some new ideas away as well. We also like to thank Zeta Tau Alpha for just making the Advanced U program possible. Following today's session, a recording will be posted on the AFA site within about 2 weeks. And so all webinar participants will also receive a program evaluation for today's session. So we hope that you will take the time to provide us with your feedback. We take that seriously. And so for April's Advanced U program, we will be discussing how to invite creativity into our work. We will have Gert Garman from Valencia College and formerly from Disney Destinations to discuss this topic. And so look for a sign-up email for this program occurring on April 25th. So thank you again, Jessica, for your session, and for all of you as participants. We hope you continue to be willing to think differently and work differently through learning about new ideas and topics and joining us again for Advanced U. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.